guides my anti-violence work as anti-oppression work is a deep understanding that oppression is one of the root causes of violence, and the understanding that we can't end one form of violence without ending all forms of violence. And so as advocates, especially for me as an African American advocate, it was not separable to me. I could not separate one thing from the other. I've always seen anti-oppression work, anti-racism work as primary anti-violence work.
Anti-racism is a vital component of anti-violence work. These videos were created by and for advocates to encourage dialogue and collective action in centering anti-racism work in the movement to end intimate violence.
I think for me, as a queer woman of color, who's the daughter of immigrants from India, who's non-binary in terms of my gender identity, I think about anti-violence work as anti-oppression work because that's what my life is. I was raped as a child and in a house in which my dad was also beating my mom. So a commitment to anti-violence work is part of my own healing trajectory. But if I didn't also fight homophobia and racism and xenophobia, I still wouldn't be fighting for my own liberation.
It is critical for advocates to be doing anti-racism work because it's important for us to do prevention. I mean, prevention to me is the core of what we do.
The anti-violence field has created a service delivery model that works for disproportionately white, heterosexual, able-bodied, temporarily poor women. And when we think of anyone outside of those categories, they are not being served adequately. They're not having access to resources.
I see racism as part of this constellation of oppression, each interacting with the other, influencing the other, compounding the other. I see racism as part of an intersectional relationship with power. And so for me, that is the core of racism, this intersectional relationship with power based on white supremacy. And you'll see it in all forms of oppression.
Racism looks different in terms of different countries in the world. In the United States, racism is specifically when somebody's prejudice is backed up by the way the state is set up, by the laws and the institutions and the policies of that government actually sanctioning or supporting someone's personal prejudice. And so in the United States, this is a country that was founded on the genocide and enslavement of indigenous people here, and then later the kidnapping and enslavement of people from Africa. And when you look back at the founding laws and policies of the United States, we see that people who were indigenous or who were enslaved Africans were not considered human beings. They were considered property. Native people in the United States were not even given the right to vote until the 1920s. And so there's a long legacy of the prejudice of the white people who founded the United States. We need to acknowledge that when people were enslaved, they were also raped systematically. And this has been well documented. If you look at the Whitney Plantation Museum down in Louisiana, we now have memorials and testimonies of slaves, particularly slave girls, talking about how the slave master would come in and take them to be raped at night. Sexual violence was actually part of slavery. It was part of colonization. And so if we want to end intimate violence, if we want to end child sexual abuse, if we want to end sexual violence in the United States, we have to grapple with the history of racism and colonization and slavery in this country. It's actually part of the work together. One thing that we know for sure is the DSM now names racism as a cause of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we know that people of color in the United States are experiencing PTSD at higher rates. We also know that when a parent, for example, is living with PTSD, their judgment may be impaired if they get triggered. They may not be able to act with love in a moment of being triggered and may be more likely to yell at their child, for example. So there's part of the cycle of violence there. For people of color, particularly poor people of color who are being heavily policed, who are being over-incarcerated, we know that oftentimes in interactions with police, people's lives are on the line, people are being raped by the police, particularly for transgender and queer people of color, for Black people, for Indigenous people. When you're absorbing that level of violence, violence is a learned behavior. And that lesson comes back into your homes, back into your communities. And so, I think it's a very difficult burden that we have as people of color who have survived violence to name the rates at which we experience it from the people that we love. And if we really want to end intimate violence, ultimately we have to end white supremacy. And that burden is also on our white allies to help us undo this very violent system that we're all living within and in which people of color are suffering the most.
It's not our fault that we ended up in the situation where racism and white supremacy are as prevalent as they are. It is not our fault. And it is totally possible for us to take this on in our lives. I know that as advocates, we all want to leave the world in a better place than when we came into the world. And by being deliberate about ending racism, by approaching the work with joy and delight in ourselves and in the humanity that we see in others, it's a win-win situation. There's no way we can lose.